Hmm. Mhm.
Hey, Dan.
Well, hi, Lisa.
Okay. Hello. Right.
Hi, Lisa. It's Ray.
Is that my favorite Ray Rupp search?
Yes, it is.
Hi, honey. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good.
You're looking good. And I see where you've been staying really busy.
Well, I like being busy. I'm happier when I'm busy.
Yeah.
Lisa, as you recall, Ray Rupp Search is the first elected official that you and I ever met in DuPage County as the mayor of Villa Park.
I do remember that.
I remember Lisa when she was our Key Club advisor at Willowbrook.
Yeah. Well,
Long
since
time.
we have, yeah. Well, we have other people on this call who are just not fully aware of all my past history, so maybe we should just keep it that way.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Good evening.
Hi, welcome. We have about 4 minutes or so before we get started.
Oh.
Hey, Mike Briggs.
Lisa, how are you?
Living the dream. How are
Yeah,
you?
doing the same. Trying anyway. Everything okay in your world?
Everything is dandy.
I love
That's
Mike.
awesome. Dan, how are you?
Good. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you.
All right. Boom. Hey, Regina.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
And as soon as our featured guest joins, we will get started.
Hey, Lisa, can I say something right quick?
You absolutely, Regina. You can do anything.
I haven't seen some of these people since the King breakfast. And so I just want to say I'm so grateful. Thank you for all your hard work, all your participation, all your money, all of your, oh my God, your compassion. the way you welcome the guests, it was just superb. So they're still talking about you. They're sending you their love and thanking you for a magnificent welcoming to Chicago on that day, even though we know it was sub-zero weather, but they send their gratitude. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Regina. Okay. All right, and it's okay. I'm and we'll get started as soon as our guest joins. Who is logging on now? All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mhm. And you know it's a good Zoom call when you have to scroll a couple pages to see who all has joined. And no worries for those of you who are in the car. This is like the perfect Zoom to be in the car driving and listening in on. So no worries, just be safe while you drive. Okay, so will be on shortly. So because I'm a former school teacher, I'm used to when the bell rings, we get started. We like to start on time and end on time. We have it slated for an hour and a half. It's gonna be about an hour conversation. And for those who need to go and see their families, no problem. For those who want to stay longer and ask questions, you're welcome to stay on and do that. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Lisa Wagner. I am actually married to Dan Wagner and been part of the journey watching the evolution of the DuPage County Dr. Martin Luther King Advisory Committee. As a former teacher, as someone who has a great interest in special needs, especially neurodiversity, it's near and dear to my heart. April is Autism Acceptance Month. And in that spirit, today is also the 56th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King, who chose and gave us the example to choose community over chaos. For those of you, not everybody on the Zoom is from DuPage. For those of you who are not from DuPage, before we turn it over to Dr. Dunne, I want to give you a little background. About 200 people came together and read Dr. Martin Luther King's book, Community Over Chaos, and really brought together a bright light in a county that didn't have it. And in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King's death, I want to turn the program over to Dan and Regina Brent, who co-chair the committee, to give a little 2 minutes brief, honey. I say this because of my husband, brief. And then Regina, if you have any words you want to say about Dr. King on this sacred day, and then we'll turn it on to our program. Dan?
Thank you, everybody. And thanks for everybody that's involved with our Dr. King DuPage County Advisory Group. So many friends are on this call, and just consider yourselves hugged. We are excited to be having this Zoom call with one of our very own DuPage County folks that Maureen Dunne is just such a rock star. And we are excited that on April 17th, we're going to be going to Mike Briggs, Little Friends Center of Autism. And then, of course, Ray Graham is going to be hosting as well a dinner from 5:30 to 7:30 at 27545 Deal Road in Warrenville. So we'll be over at Little Friends talking as well. We're excited about that. And then we have a whole slate of events scheduled for the year. You're going to be able to get that invitation of all the different events coming up May 2nd at NICOR. We're going to have Asian Martin Luther King Day. And so we have a variety of events we're going to be doing. But more importantly, the person that really gives us the heart and soul and spirit of this organization is Regina Brent. And I want to turn it over to Regina and just tell you what Regina has become a very, very close friend, and she's an adopted Wagner. So Regina, take it away. You're on mute, Regina.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dan. I appreciate it. And you know, my feelings are mutual, and you have grown to be such a very impactful, good, and social figure that I highly respect. You've taken me places that I hadn't been before, and you've opened my eyes to a lot of things when it comes to promoting this civil rights MLK breakfast. And so I want to tell you how grateful I am about that. Getting on with what today really stands for is the assassination of Dr. King. I've been very privy over the months to know that family for many, many years. I was just thinking this morning as I was getting prepared for this call, how they have really sacrificed their life for people who are indifferent to the norm, as we would like to think. This is Autism Month, and I can't even imagine what he would be doing at this time if he was here to represent people of indifference when it comes to mental health. And with that being said, I do believe at the time he was assassinated, Dr. King himself was experiencing some kind of depression. I understand when he was younger, he had a situation with attempting perhaps even suicide. I don't know how true that is, but I do know that there were some mental health situations that happened with him, not only during his childhood, but also at the time when he was assassinated. And so today I read an article, and it says on Thursday, April 4th, Martin Luther King III, which is his son, was sitting at home in Atlanta with his siblings watching the news when a news bulletin flashed across their TV screen. Their father, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., had been assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And he was assassinated because of the things that he thought he should do in order to rectify the world when it came to social justice, when it came to racism, when it came to poverty, when it came to disparities with health, mental health. All of these things Dr. King was concerned about. And so it doesn't surprise me any that even at the time now that we're here today, we have suffered a sacrifice, a loss, because of the things we're trying to do to make the world better. Dan lost Mr. Goodwin. I lost Mrs. King. The King family lost 3 people in 3 months. His sister passed away at 94 in July of 2023. His son, passed away in November. And now Mrs. King, she passed away, his sister-in-law, in March. And so when we talk about mental illness, when we talk about autism, when we talk about all these things that has to be dealt with on a daily basis, my heart goes out to everybody and their families who incur these kind of I wouldn't say they're atrocities, but these are the kind of things that life shows up with for us. And so thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to remind us that we're on this call today, not just because we want to acknowledge a mental health crisis, but we want to acknowledge the reason why the state of the world is in trouble today. And does it affect all of us? Yes. And it can affect us even in a mental health way. So thank you for allowing me to speak, Lisa.
You're welcome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for that, Regina. Thank you, Dan. I get the privilege and pleasure of introducing Dr. Maureen Dunne, who is someone who, before I got to know you, I thought we were always kindred spirits, both triplet moms. We care about neurodiversity. We see being neurodivergent as a strength and the path that's going to cure a lot of the complex problems that we face today. We see it as a positive. But then I got to know you, and you're a Rhodes Scholar, you're on the Lego board, you went to Stanford. Yeah. So she just, after the triplets, we have nothing else. So I'm very excited to be here with you today. For those of you who haven't picked up the book, the Neurodiversity Edge, I strongly recommend it. I will send a link out around. It is excellent. And it, like so many things, it changes your perception over what is possible. And how, as we build communities, as we build cultures, both in our workplace, in our organization, in our towns, that some of the best and the brightest minds may not be at the table just because of our false perception of things. And so, Maureen, thank you for writing this book. Why don't we get started? And what we'll do is she'll talk about the book for about 20 minutes. And then any question that you have about neurodiversity, autism, Mike Briggs is here from Little Friends. Anything is open and it's a discussion. So let's get started. Maureen, okay, can you talk about what is neurodiversity and why is it so important?
Sure. Yeah. So for a little bit of context, the neurodiversity as a movement really started in the 1990s, and it coincided with the internet, because suddenly across the globe there were it started really with mostly autistic individuals that started to find each other on the internet and, you know, be interacting. And then there was an Australian sociologist that coined the term neurodiversity. But it was the idea that there's another way to think about autism, ADHD, and other neurological differences besides the deficit-based medical model, and that there's you can think about it from a strength-based perspective, and that I guess at the core, neurodiversity is just that all human beings have strengths and weaknesses, and people that consider themselves neurodivergent may have differences in brain function and behavioral traits, but that should be appreciated and respected and valued just as much as any other human being. So that's just a little bit of context. And why is it so important? I mean, there's I could talk for hours about that. I would say there's you know, my book, I talk a lot about the importance of differences and diversity to the strength of our communities and organizations, and why we don't all have to be the same. There's examples even from I gave an example with bees, where the honeybees. There's, you know, some researchers have started to look more in depth into the waggle dance, which is 80% of honeybees, you know, follow obediently and perform it well, but there's a good 20% that don't follow those instructions. And some researchers were, you know, been looking into why, you know, maybe they need more mentorship, but it turns out that there's, you know, the 20% that sort of go off in random directions and do things differently are actually finding new sources of pollen, whereas the 80%, the waggle dance, they communicate with each other in terms of locating already known sources of pollen. And so the 20% that looks like they're just, you know, going in random directions is actually benefiting the hive community. They just have a different role. And so, you know, it's one way we can just think about the importance of our, when we extend that to thinking about just human diversity. And also just the other really important thing to understand is just the scale of this. Like, you know, 15 to 20% of the global population falls under the neurodivergent umbrella. And, you know, it's much broader than autism, it's ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, you know, different types of language impairments, synesthesia. There's all sorts of different ways in which the brain can function that can fall under the neurodiversity umbrella, and that there's a huge disproportionality in terms of skilled people around the world that are not, you know, self-actualizing. The unemployment and underemployment rate is really unacceptably high. So if you put all the cognitive typologies together, you know, it may be even higher, but what's been documented is, you know, 30 to 40% unemployment rate, when, you know, the average in the US is well under 4% for the general population. And then for autistic people in particular, it may be as high as, you know, 80 to 85%, and that includes college graduates. So there's just, you know, a huge disproportionality, a lot of skilled people that are being left behind, that are being marginalized and sidelined, that have so much to offer and contribute. And it's really a matter of I think, you know, people, employers and communities and everyone really having a better understanding of neurodiversity, of ways in which people are excluded or are being marginalized, different ways that, you know, interview processes may prevent inclusion.
Thank you. I want to touch on that point about the large number of population. One is, I want to talk about the perception of their intellect. One of the things that family members that I've experienced through family members is that because they had a certain diagnosis, it was assumed their intellect wasn't so high, or it was mental health issue. Can you speak to that, about the cognitive strengths of those who may be
Yeah, it's an important point. I bring it up in the introduction, that, you know, there are a lot of people that assume if someone's neurodivergent, if they have autism or ADHD, that you know, means there's an intellectual disability, and that's a totally separate thing. So, you know, autistic people or ADHDers or dyslexic people are just like any other people. You know, I mean, you could be incredibly highly intellectually gifted or have an intellectual disability, or be, you know, anywhere in between, just like anyone else. And so the atypical profile that, you know, what we'd call spiky profiles, sort of, you know, neurodivergent people tend to have just more uneven profiles. So they may be exceptional at some things and not as good as others. They tend not to be too average. But the more important thing is that you know, a diagnosis or a profile, a neurodivergent profile is a separate thing from intellectual capability.
Thank you. The other piece that I found fascinating, and in listening to some of your work, is the number of entrepreneurs who are neurodiverse and CEOs who are neurodiverse. Can you speak to that, the correlation between the entrepreneurship and neurodiversity?
Yeah, there's some. I mean, so there's the research side, and then there's just the experience I have having lived in Palo Alto and been heavily involved in entrepreneurship and venture capital myself. But yeah, there's especially what we'd call ADHDers and dyslexics and autistic people too. There's a huge correlation with entrepreneurship. There's been some studies as well about like dyslexic millionaires. It's like 40%. You know, or roughly 40% are dyslexic. So you know, there's a lot of interesting studies. I co-founded a program in partnership with Innovation to Page called the Neurodiverse Entrepreneur Program, and just in the process of screening applicants, and I'm a co-founder of a social impact group called Autism Angels Group too. It's been we've been documenting as well. There is also, though, I would say, there's a not small percentage though of some entrepreneurs that would prefer their neurodivergent, that would prefer to work for a big company and not be entrepreneurs, but that they effectively have been railroaded into entrepreneurship because they don't fit into the big companies. So that's one of the things I'm working on in terms of trying to change is the larger organizations, them really understanding the value of having people that think differently. The larger organizations tend to be more stuck in their ways and stagnate, in terms of innovation, and could potentially benefit the most from people that are willing to challenge their status quo.
Let's expand on that a bit, because this is a nice dovetail into the complementary cognition of what we do in our communities, in our churches, and our schools, and how we approach, not only just in terms of culture, which I think is really key. If we had a different culture in 1968 with Martin Luther King, he would still be alive. It's truly a culture change and how we view the world and our fellow humans. So can you talk about how we evolve and create that within schools, community, workplace?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer. I mean, I get into in my book something I called the pyramid of neuro inclusion, and at the base layer of that, I purposely put psychological safety, because there's lots of different elements to the pyramid if you're serious as an organization or community about becoming more authentically neuro-inclusive. And so, just familiarizing yourself with what, that people may have auditory sensory overload, and all the different ways in which people could be inadvertently being excluded, just becoming more aware and familiarizing yourself. But at the same time, even if those layers are in place, if there's not a level of psychological safety where people can just be themselves without facing prejudice or discrimination or repercussions for just being who they are, there's no amount of neurodiversity friendly policies that will sort of erase that kind of trauma. And so I think there's a lot. I mean, it's expanded on a lot in the book, and then also there's online resource tools that go along with the book that you could help guide organizations or individuals in having a better understanding of different steps that you could take to get on the path of becoming more authentically neuro-inclusive. But I think having a real appreciation for all kinds of minds is important too. And that's also why I, as a cognitive scientist too, I did a whole chapter called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Cognitive Diversity, so that there's an appreciation for things like lateral thinking, nonlinear thinking, systems thinking, talents that are, invisible and don't really shine that well in verbal interviews, but do often go hand in hand with, not all the time, but there are a lot of neurodivergent people that excel in those type of skill sets. And so just becoming more aware. And then, I would also bring up about, you mentioned with entrepreneurship, but there's a lot of studies I talk about in the book too about creativity. And, for example, with just, with ADHD, there was a study, a psychologist named Holly White looked at college students, ADHD college students versus neurotypical college students. And it was interesting. She asked them to imagine alien fruits that wouldn't exist on Earth. And so I put some of these drawings in the book, but what she found and what her interpretation of her findings was that that one of a lot of ADHDers they're not as confined to certain rigid boundaries, and they may have access to more semantic choices, and so their drawings of alien fruits tended to be more original, just you know, the neurotypical ones that they thought were also creative and original, but they were more like building on top of existing models and creating from there versus sort of left field, like, you know, different types of features that really don't you don't really aren't really familiar with on Earth. So so I think familiarizing oneself with you know, different types of skill sets that could come along, and also just when you're, you know, knowing that you may be wrong. Like there's, I mean, like just knowing that you know, that anytime there's a lot of assumptions that get into play with in our communication between neurotypes sometimes, and I think it's always a good thing to really work hard to build these empathy bridges and take a step back and say, okay, you know, maybe there's I didn't interpret what just happened correctly, and, you know, actively look for different interpretations. Like everybody should do that, both neurodivergent and neurotypical people, if they want to build these empathy bridges.
That's great. I want you to expand a little bit because it's my fundamental belief as a human being that sometimes the square pegs that don't fit in round holes can make such an enormous difference, a large scale difference for everyone within an organization. And so by investing in neuro inclusion, as you talk about, by making the community, whether it's your workplace or whether it's an organization or a school, classroom, small group, whatever, that by making the culture of that place neuro-inclusive, inclusive for all humans, that it pays huge dividends for that organization culture group. And within the Dr. Martin Luther King Advisory Committee and a breakfast, we saw that. How do you see that as well? Can you expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, so one thing I've done a lot of work in is why organizations of all kinds should not be committed to what we call cultural fit. You know, that there's you know, and there's a lot that I talk about with different cognitive biases that come into play that could distort our perceptions of
Groupthink, for example.
So like one is called the halo effect, where, you know, we tend to be influenced by like a general impression of someone, and then that sort of colors subjectively colors everything we may think about that person in terms of what they're qualified for or capable of. And there's, you know, there's been a number of studies. One showed an actor that you know, was a professor. It was a study where, like, you know, a professor like pretended to be acted as like one very like warm and fuzzy personality, but like the information was all the same, and another one was just sort of like a little bit more introverted. You know, one's like super extroverted and very, very, you know, over the top friendly, and the other personality was just a bit more introverted. And you know, and what came out of that was that we, like, I mean, in general, that the one with the more extroverted personality was then judged as, you know, more intelligent, more capable, like all the positive, and the other person was judged in much more. And so there's these types of judgments so that could come into play then if you have, say, I don't know, an autistic. I think I bring up this point in my book, like how much more qualified would the introverted autistic person need to be, that's, you know, competing for a job that where you don't even, like, I don't know, it could be a financial analyst, it could be a cybersecurity position, but just that has absolutely nothing to do with the way in which we're interviewing sometimes has nothing to do with the actual skills needed for that job. And so it's always helpful just to be aware of the different ways in which our brains can trick ourselves into you know, it's just how we're wired, but I think it's helpul. And then there's, you know, there's many others. There's the availability bias. So like what you know, that we tend to overestimate, you know, what's most psychologically available to us in terms of information, and that, you know, ends up playing a bigger role in some of our decision making than you know, necessarily should be the case. And then there's a chapter I where I talked about groupthink, and that one was particularly interesting because, you know, I talked about some studies even with autistic children where there's researchers were, you know, tried to purposely mislead all the child participants, neurotypical and autistic, about you know, they had 3 lines, and like, you know, the question was like which line, you know, matches best matches, you know, one of the other 2. And when researchers tried to like mislead the children of like which was the correct answer, it was just the autistic children that were very resistant to going along, right, with the obviously incorrect. I mean, it was a situation where it was like it was super obvious what. So it just you know, I'm not saying that plays out in every situation, but it's just, I think it's always helpful to just be, you know, become aware of you know, and I go through just what I call them a species of invisible cockroaches. the some of the cognitive biases that could come and play, and we, you know, and we're all prone to these, and just I think it helps to become more aware of them, so that it's just easier to identify them, or at least question yourself in real time whenever possible.
So, what are some of the barriers for authentic inclusion? I mean, we've touched a little bit about on them, and then how do we create the sense of belonging? You wrote in your book, this is the moment to embrace authentic neurodiversity inclusion as a core organizational value. It isn't the whole solution to anything, but it's part of the solution to nearly everything. Why do you say that?
I think, I mean, you know, like, first of all, it's important just in its own right, to create communities where everybody feels a sense of belonging and included. But we're in a really unusual time in history, in my opinion, because this is the first time where cognitive work is going to be taken over in a more serious way. And it's already, you know, in motion, but just it's accelerating, right, with AI and all sorts of technologies. And I think a lot of organizations are overly obsessed or focused on the technology part and the AI part, and not really well prepared, or not preparing their organizations for the human side, the human resources side of any of these shifts that will be accelerating, and becoming familiar with, you know, the complementary cognition, like, you know, it's important that not everybody think the same. It's important that if there's when AI starts to take over a lot of the you know, data processing speeds and linear tasks, that there's people that know how to work alongside machines, that are training AI, that have skill sets and abilities that fall outside of those conceptual coverage maps, which I would call like intuitive leaps of logic or insight, you know, which is you know, very nonlinear types of thought processes, you know, connecting. I think one of the examples I give in the final chapter is, you know, just connecting a more multi-sensory experience that, you know, you may have had at a botanical garden, to something that happened with a friend at a funeral, and then, you know, somehow that these sort of seemingly illogical insights start to connect dots that come into play at either, you know, solving a problem at work, or you know, for creativity too. Like, you know, these AI systems, they're, if you trained, you could train it really well on, you know, to for example, like, you know, understand certain types of classical music, but it's not going to take, it's going to be a mashup of its already existing human expressions. So like, so the types of processes that fall outside those maps, and that are truly starting with new foundational assumptions are really important. And I think that, groups that include people that may be thinking outside of the box more, even if you don't always, even if they're not always practical or good ideas, just having enough psychological safety in place that that's even possible to have these more disruptive conversations are that much more critical to our communities and organizations, because we're all just, going to increasingly find ourselves in more uncertain territory.
Wow. I don't know if I'm scared or hopeful by that response there. Tell us about the 3 C's that you talk about in your book.
Yeah, so 3 C's are how codification and conduct drives culture. And why that's important is I've worked with a lot of organizations that, where we spend a lot of time revising and updating, HR policies and different types of policy frameworks. And that's, or we do, value statements, and that's a really good starting point. But if those same organizations don't have integrity between what they're codifying as their values and what they're allowing on a day-to-day basis in terms of habits and mind share and conduct, because at the end of the day, how you actually, what you actually spend your time, money, and mind share on is what you value. And so when there's that lack of integrity, that's going to drive, in my, opinion, a bad culture, right? And so to become more, authentically neuro inclusion. So someone's asking if I could repeat. So codification and conduct drives culture. So you're codifying policies, you're codifying, you have, a lot of organizations that do value statements or mission statements. The CEO may be interviewed by the Wall Street Journal and say, this is, we value diversity, these type of statements. If then that same CEO the next day, goes and treats people really poorly and, acts or behaves in a way that actually is the complete opposite of that framework or, what that organization is codified in policy, then that's going to be a poor culture. And or if the leaders allow for neurodivergent people to be bullied or be the scapegoat for everything that goes wrong, or you say you value people that are different and that are neurodivergent, and then in reality what happens or what's allowed to happen in that office is then people are talked about in very negative light. Or so the point is that if it's a values I espouse a very values driven approach rather than a tick the box approach. I don't think a tick the box approach works, but a values driven approach, it's only going to be effective to the extent in which what you say and what you say you value and what you say to the the newspapers and the mission statements, that to the extent that there's organizational alignment where especially there's buy-in with the leaders and what actually is happening on the day-to-day basis, that there's integrity with what that organization says they value.
That's awesome. I feel like going, yeah. So, well, I know there are a bunch of questions, my getting some on my phone and in the chat. So we're gonna take questions at the end, and I promise we'll get to all of them. I'm going to switch to a few human questions, and these are human about you and the why behind this. But let's start with the easy one. What was the favorite part of the book for you?
Yeah, that one's a tough one, but I think it's become the Universal Empathy Network, which is the chapter before the conclusion, chapter 13, because I talk about a case study where there was, a genuine misunderstanding between an autistic employee and a neurotypical employee, and they both were completely reasonable and just had very different experiences where, it was dealing with a thermostat setting where for the autistic employee, she had a lot of auditory overload. And so it was, the air conditioning was on really loud. And so it was just overwhelming her. And she had communicated that, but what was heard by the neurotypical employee was what he experienced, which was it was too cold. And so he went and convinced a manager to turn it, to the heat mode, and it was a really old system, so that made it louder. And so then she, like flew into a rage and, couldn't believe it. So it was like this but they were both actually well-intentioned, which was great, and it's just that they had very different experiences. And so the universal empathy network is familiarizing yourself with something called the double empathy problem. And, what was once assumed to be basically just a inherent deficit of autism, like as if people with autism don't have empathy, or is being recast as something more similar to how we might view when we travel to another country where there's very different cultural or social expectations, or there's just different shared experiences to draw upon. And so a lot of autistic people actually, the communication issues completely go away when they're interacting with each other, because they have a lot of shared experiences to draw upon. And there's, more forgiveness, if there's a screw up, basically, with, not perfectly conforming to a social rule, or, so there's, and then, neurotypical people, misunderstand autistic people just as badly, apparent, as autistic people may sometimes misunderstand neurotypical people. So like, a lot of autistic people are not particularly interested in small talk, and then a lot of neurotypical people don't have that experience with other neurotypical people, so then they interpret that as being rude. So so the double empathy problem is, that shared experiences matter. And there's so much, so and I've kind of taken it to this other level for like organizations of like, well, if we, if we can put more effort in building these empathy bridges and realizing that there's things we can each play a role, and it's not necessarily the neurodivergent person's fault or a neurotypical person's fault, but we're sometimes, and I think this extends to everyone, not just different neurotypes, but like we all sometimes are coming from very different experiences, and the more we can do to build those bridges and assume good faith that, to start and try to have an understanding, the more that we're going to be able to, I think, be successful as organizations.
That's awesome. And that's exactly what the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Advisory Committee is trying to do throughout all of DuPage and all our different networks, big, large, small, coming together. 3 more human questions and then we'll open it up. What was the why behind you writing this book? Like what led you to writing this book? What was you've been doing this your whole life. You are a world-renowned expert, but what was the thing that made you write it?
It was time. I mean, I've been working on this for a really long time. And, if I go back 20 years, the world was, my work was not, I couldn't have published a book like this because we were so entrenched in a deficit-based perspective and model. And, it's, I think the world is ready now for I think we're an inflection point in a lot of ways, and we have a very proud neurodivergent global community that's very vocal now as well, and the research has come together, and I think it was time to put all the work I had been doing for a long time into a coherent book that I think could, at least I'm hoping, could make a positive difference. And there's a lot more organizations that are open, I think, than was the case. Like, I think there's been a lot of change. I've noticed a lot of change even in the last 2 years with companies and organizations. There's more familiarity, there's a little more openness, and yet and yet there's still a lot of ignorance and bias and stereotyping, and just, you know, a lot of people that just don't have the tools or the knowledge. And so I wanted to give everyone more tools and knowledge to make sure that, you know, that they have, you don't have to be a CEO of a company. I mean, I think anyone can use the information in the book just to become an ally and to champion inclusivity in their communities or their organizations. But I felt that there really is a gap in terms of information on this topic. There's books that are more general on neurodiversity, but not quite, you know, yeah, right, all these tools. So I think it's just was the right time, and I wanted to, I'm hoping that it'll make a positive difference.
I think it already has. Okay, what is, if when we turn off the Zoom and we go out into the world and we go to our families and we go to our workplaces, what is the takeaway you want everybody here to know or leave here with tonight?
Yeah, to really aim to familiarize yourself with neurodiversity and have an appreciation for all kinds of minds, and to find ways to maybe help develop these opportunity pathways for the 20% of the world population that is not able to actualize themselves. That there's still, like you mentioned, there's still a lot of college graduates that can't find employment, that are, you know, motivated and skilled, and doing whatever you can to try to help, at least, if not anything else, to become familiar enough with neurodiversity to share positive stories about people you might know, or get to know someone who's neurodivergent. Don't assume everyone's like, you know, Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, or or, you know, Rain Man, or, I mean, it's an extremely richly diverse community with lots of talented people, lots of interesting people. Get to know more neurodivergent people and share positive stories about them.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to open it up for questions. I've had one texted in, and I'm going to start with that one, and then I'm just going to go through the chat, call on you, and you can ask your question. And the question comes in from the text is, where do we start if we want to change our workplace? Do we just read the book? Can we bring you in? Like, where do we start?
I think read the book, and then get in touch with me if you have questions. There are some templates that come along with the book that give some guidance, but feel free to get in touch with questions or if I can help.
Okay. I will send I noticed your website. It's lovely. I will send that around, and with that contact page. We have a question from Janice regarding ADHD diagnosis and what you may know about it. Janice, do you want to ask your question?
Dr. Dunne, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to really open up the world of neurodiversity. And I know in the Black community, it's been a little bit challenging. And a question that, and I'm not sure if this is your lane or not, that comes to mind is when we don't make these diagnoses in Black students early in the process, and unfortunately, often we don't. And then what comes out of that is these, instead of the behavior being seen as there is a neurodivergent issue here that needs to be addressed. So by the time that child is ready to, as he proceeds through his education, is ready to go to college or trade school, whatever, he or she now comes with a very problem past. And we know from studies that often Black children are expelled from school, and that is the pipeline to prison. So what do you recommend we do in the early childhood process to intentionally have more of our children, and particularly in our Black and Brown populations, have them go through some kind of formal process that allows a diagnosis so that we can have treatment that will give them a better opportunity to actualize their dreams and aspirations.
Right. No, you bring up some really important points, and I think part of it goes to like you know, when we're talking about like education and opportunities, and we've been talking a lot about workforce, but all these things start so much earlier, right? Like preschool and kindergarten, like there's still a lot of teachers that don't have the training or the support, and may just, there might be an ADHD kid that's just seen as a bad kid, right? And then is treated as a bad kid, and that's, then turns into this whole other thing. And then one thing, I didn't talk much about, I talk a little bit in my book, is just this is a population where there's so many outlier lists, right? Like there is an overrepresentation in unemployment, underemployment, in prison, and also, oddly, Nobel Prize winners, right? So it's just, it's a most, so there's some outlier lists that are positive, but by and far majority of people are being left behind and are marginalized. And I think a lot of what I talk in the book needs to be extended much, much earlier, and we need to be doing more at Head Start, in preschool, in even a lot of pediatricians. It's gotten better, I think, the last 5-10 years, but at one time, like, pediatricians weren't really familiar with this as well. So I think all of the individuals that very young children come into contact with also need to have the training and resources to be able to accurately identify what's happening, so that kids don't, especially children of color, which they're, as you mentioned, I mean, it happens far too often, where there might be a mislabeling or misinterpretation of certain behaviors, and then that just sets this whole expectation of failure, right? That we need to try to reverse course. And I think it does start with education and awareness in early childhood, and resources. I mean, I guess that's the other thing, that there needs to be more resources, especially in some of the underserved communities. There needs to be more resources, so that there's that because a lot of there's right now there isn't as much training as should be happening in early childhood in general.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next question comes from Don Smith. Don, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? And I'll
Sure.
spotlight you.
Hello, Dr. Dunne. A pleasure to meet you. I have my copy right here. I'm almost halfway through it. Yeah, in fact, myself and another colleague of mine have reached out to try to get you to hopefully speak for our organization. So fingers crossed there. I am self-diagnosed. I'm all but formally diagnosed. I'd love to tell you my story, but I'll just get to my question. What would you say to an organization, at the corporate level, that is not opposed to anything that we're talking about per se, but at the same time, while there's interest within individual business units, if you will, there's, at the corporate level, still kind of don't know what they don't know about this topic, and are unfortunately, but I guess understandably, more concerned about legal compliance versus accommodations and managing to the strengths of neurodivergent individuals as well as neurotypicals, and could likely require folks to have a formal diagnosis and not accept the validity of a self-diagnosis.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I mean, I think organizations, CEOs, and boards, having especially boards with the fiduciary duties that they have to shareholders, if it's a for-profit company is, first of all, they should be concerned about making sure that they're attracting the best talent, the right talent, that they're not hiring all the same type of thinkers, right? That you want divergent thinkers. And so that in of itself should be of interest and valued. Now, what I argue in my book is really principles of universal design, where if you want to get maximum productivity from everyone, neurotypical and neurodivergent, then you want to design spaces and policies and practices you want, where it's not just someone who has a diagnosis. You don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis to come ask to say, I'm going to be more productive if I can use headphones, because I'm kind of, where everybody can, it's just normalized, right? Like, okay, if right, things like headphones, or there's more flexibility around hybrid or work from home policies, and managers are well trained, and they have more authority over day-to-day processes to authorize more flexibility, but that the focus is on results, and nobody's getting away with anything, right? Like, it's just like, hey, let's create environments where people are excited to come to work, where there's maximum psychological safety. And one thing we didn't talk about is in the session that I think's really valuable is in the book. I talk a little bit about Google's Project Aristotle, where they studied all of their teams and they tried to understand which ones were the best performing and most innovative. And they weren't the teams that were the best, had the most resources, or the teams that they thought, had the most talented employees. They were the teams that had the highest level of psychological safety. And that goes for, there's obvious benefits with neurodivergent people that may be coming up with, unique ideas, but for everyone, right? That's an example of something where, you put practices in place is going to benefit all your employees, and then it's going to be essential for, to get the most out of particularly neurodivergent people. But I would say it's important to create an environment that's psychologically safe for people want to disclose, that they can disclose, and ask for what they need and what kind of supports they need to be the most productive, but to not, ideally you want to create an environment where it's really more about just increasing productivity and for everyone, right? So someone doesn't necessarily have to disclose to have some minor accommodations that's going to make that person a lot more productive.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amber Quick, who is our regional superintendent, is on this call. I don't know, I saw her here. Amber, I don't know if you're on. You had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, I was attending a Choose to Page board meeting, and the parent group, PAEP, it's the Parent Alliance for Employment Project. That's what it is. And it's on the website, it's listed as, children with disabilities or young adults with disabilities who need to work. They were presenting to this group in DuPage of businesses to encourage them to use this program. And as I was hearing the discussion about, children with autism or ADHD, some of the kids that they talked about had autism, and again, they're listing it as a disability, and we're talking about the strength-based approach. So I just wanted to make sure everybody on the call is aware of that, especially if you are in an organization that and could talk to somebody about hiring, that it would be an opportunity. And even as you were speaking about in your book, thinking about setting things up in your organization that would allow you to make these practices, I was starting to think, who could we hire? What are some jobs we could hire for? I mean, we don't have any openings right now, but I'm thinking about it. So anyway, I just want to make sure everybody was aware of it.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick that It's also important to be aware that that there's a good portion of neurodivergent people that don't actually consider themselves disabled, that that see themselves as just so it's there's a lot of nuances in the community. So some people do see themselves as disabled, and other people just see themselves as being wired differently. And then there's increasingly younger population, especially Gen Z, that there's a really large percentage that that we don't know all the details, but are identifying with the neurodiversity umbrella. It's like, so the last study I saw was by Zen Business, and it was slightly over 50% that either reported themselves as somewhat or definitely neurodivergent. So I just bring it up because it's a nuance where yeah, not everybody identifies as being disabled, but some people just see themselves as being wired differently.
Thank you for that. It's been an hour since we started, and do you have time to continue with a few more questions, Dr. Dunne? Okay, awesome. And for those of you who have the cutoff, you're welcome. You're welcome to go. Thank you for joining us. For those who'd like to stay, you're welcome to stay. We are recording this, and so after we get it cleaned up, we will send it around. The next question is David Roth. David, I think this is an excellent question. Can you ask it?
Sure, Dr. Dunn, this is fantastic presentation that you're providing. It's guidance for good organizations, period. Can strengthen us so many ways. So I wonder, are there cultures or places where you have seen appreciation for divergence, diverse thinking, diverse approaches? Are there places that you see have done that well?
Yeah, I've worked with several organizations, that I think are doing this really well, and the ones that I think are taking the right approach are not necessarily creating like this special ed pathway. Like there's been a lot of like neurodiversity at work programs, and those were a great start, right? These pilot programs, they were super important. But I think the ones that I think are now taking things to the next level and really making, rather than like have this special track where it's like, okay, there's this, pilot program where we're hiring 50 autistic people and see how it goes. And it's totally separate from our business. They're working on the deeper, layers of their, like, doing organizational audits of like, well, how, what could we do differently? What could we change, in the DNA of our organizations where we're just going to be more productive, and we're going to allow people to shine that maybe have, we've missed in the past, or our interview processes have missed out on certain talent. And so the organizations are committing to that, doing that deeper work, that and looking at their processes and their organizational cultures and their policies, and rather than okay, let's do this neurodiversity at work pilot program, and we just put 50 autistic people in a room together. Those are the ones that I think are doing it right, and it's because it'll benefit everyone. If you going back to the Google project, Aristotle, if you create a culture of psychological safety where it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to ask for clarification, it's okay to challenge the status quo and bring up ideas, even if they're not the ones that get selected, that's going to be the competitive, that's where the the competitive edge is. And so by doing that deeper work, you're just going to be the type of organization that everybody wants to show up at and give their best selves and be excited to be there, right? And you're going to come up with ideas that other organizations don't. So I think it's, I think to me that's where the edge is. But it requires that commitment to doing, the deeper work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to apologize in advance if I don't pronounce your name right. Anu Verma? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I have friends, whose kids have ADHD or bipolar disorders. And my question is, how do we relate to disability as an identity? when the social organizations of disability implies that, these people are less able to function in this world. So I don't know, how do these people face this challenge of calling their neurodiversities as disabilities? That's what my question is.
How do they face how do people not think of themselves as disabled?
How do they face the challenge of calling their neurodiversities as disabilities?
Well, so there, and everybody, again, the neurodiversity umbrella is really, really broad, right? So you have people, are extremely diverse skill sets and challenges and strengths and needs for accommodation or not. So it's extremely diverse, but there are certainly people that see, are excel in environments where they're allowed to use their strengths, and it's normalized. There's just it's okay to be different, and so so I'm trying to understand better exactly what you're asking. I think you're saying that how is it challenging for people who maybe have some weaknesses but don't see themselves as disabled?
Or should we see them as intrinsic to who we are?
Yes.
I'm sorry, should we see them as what?
Intrinsic to who we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I say this a lot to just, I mean, we're all human beings. I mean, we're all human, right? I mean, it's and whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, everybody's got strengths and weaknesses, and that should be normalized, and it's, as I mentioned, there's just a lot of neurodivergent people are just more uneven. They may have extraordinary skill sets, but have challenges in others. And the more that, we can accept that the atypical and value atypical profiles, the better we're going to be, and the more that individual is going to be able to self-actualize, not be so focused on what they can't do well that they're not able to be productive using what they're very good at.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the lovely Annie Wagner.
Thanks, Mom. So I just want to ask, is there any advice that you would give to anyone that is neurodivergent?
I think it's really, there's an amazing community, global community that out there that wasn't always the case, and I think it's really important to have a tribe, right? There's a lot of to become part of the community, and there's a lot of support in the community. You also could be, someone's neurodivergent. Like, it's amazing. It's hard to understand the feeling of, like, you may say something or do something that you don't think is that important or big of a deal, but there's other people in the world that, like, are listening and could be inspired, and just being, I mean, you could be, being able to mentor other people, mentor younger neurodivergent youth is so important too. And I'm always, I encourage people. There's a lot of people I know in senior leadership positions, some that are starting to disclose, but many who, are still reluctant, like senior vice presidents and even CEOs at major corporations. And I think we'll just live in a better, more functional world the more people feel like they can be open about, and proud of being different. And because, younger people are watching and listening.
Annie, and as your mom, I think you're perfect. So, okay. All right. Next question. Harvey, this is a great question. Do you want to ask it?
Sure. Hi, my name is Harvey. I have a son that's on the spectrum. He's considered high functioning. He's currently in his first year at Aurora University. They have a program there called Pathways. in which they support neurodivergent individuals and, with the accommodations, et cetera. So obviously the goal is for him to be able to find a job and support himself one day. And I understand the odds, you stated those, but my question is, how can we go about finding companies that offer support or accommodations for neurodiverse individuals?
Yeah, so I think there's, I mean, and this is something that I'm hoping my book makes a difference. And I do think that in general, there are a lot of companies that maybe don't have the expertise on board yet, but are open to this idea of non-traditional interviews, because that's part of the, the other thing is just if you're networked into parents and people in the community, like, it's a pretty close-knit community where, people know which organizations are neurodivergent friendly and which ones aren't. So there's, I think, being plugged in with parent groups and experts. I mean, I can help, if I can help in some way as well. But I think it's you'll see organizations, some organizations, advertise themselves as even like, being having more like, non-traditional interview processes. So there's some organizations that are open about that. And then I think a lot of it is just talking to people in the community. You'll get a better sense. And there's some platforms out there too. That are where there's job opportunities that are specifically for autistic people. Although I think, where we need to move beyond that is there's still a lot of stereotypes, and a lot of positions that tend to fall under, in some of those platforms tend to be very limited, like tech roles or so I think the more that you can be active in the community, and because the industry is evolving, and I think a lot more companies are starting to come on board with doing things differently, which is good news.
Thank you.
We have a comment from Don Desarts about finding companies which support neurodivergent. Don?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Dunne. I really appreciate this conversation. Very enlightening, very informative, very important. My son, his best friend since elementary school, was one of those brilliant kids you talked about. He graduated with high honors from Northern Illinois University. And after he graduated, very smart kid, could not find a job. He played video games in his parents' basement for a year after graduating from college, rather, because some of the things that he would do as neurodivergent weren't things that were acceptable in a typical office. For example, he wouldn't make eye contact when he spoke to you. If he got nervous, he'd walk back and forth, pace, and clap, 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 and he could not find a job. And we started this conversation talking about mental health issues as well. And I think that these go hand in hand, because the longer he sat in his parents' basement playing video games after getting a college degree, the more his self-esteem fell and the more hopeless he became. And then we reached out to this place, and this might help a father who asked the question earlier. I was told about WorkNet. And so we contacted WorkNet. His parents and David and I contacted WorkNet, and they got him a job at a company called Autonomy Works. And he's been there for several years. He loves it. He feels accomplished. He feels productive, and has done wonders to his mental health. So I just wanted to put that story out there, and how tragic this whole thing could have been for David, because he's not a traditional employee. But once he got hired at a place that would accept him, his mental health has skyrocketed. He's a very happy individual now. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Autonomy Works, they're headquartered in Downers Grove. They're definitely an organization to check out. Yeah, so thank you for that. Yeah, it is. There's so many stories like that. And, there's been several individuals I've known that have, similar story. They're just, there's one person I know that, applied for, I don't know, 100+ jobs, couldn't get hired, and then, playing video games. But I think, yeah, the more that there's a genuine economic opportunity, a real opportunity that the more time that goes by that someone sort of falls into this like depression because they can't get hired, the harder it gets. And so I think the more we can, find opportunities early on, and so if someone's really interested in playing games, then maybe getting interested in, like, well, maybe you could code your own game. I've known different people that made that was made an important difference in their lives, is just connecting those dots and having an opportunity to learn coding. But yeah, and I think that the deeper issue, though, is the employers, this sort of standard interview process, which would exclude someone who's pacing and not making eye contact, or maybe not able to verbalize what their skill sets are. And so that's where, like, the non-traditional interview, so employers, if more employers become more familiar that with the roles they're actually hiring for, like, why does someone need to be the most social person in the world if you're hiring for a cybersecurity role, and then adjusting processes accordingly. The more employers that kind of become aware and come on board, I think the better, the more there won't be as many of those stories. And then also the better those organizations will be, because they'll actually be hiring people that are well suited for the roles that they're interviewing for, rather than just making like these subjective snap judgments about what someone can and can't do.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, we have no more questions in the queue. Dr. Dunne, you're awesome. You are changing the world. Never doubt the difference you make. Even in the short time, you've changed lives. And this book will definitely change lives. So I encourage you all, if you haven't ordered it, go out and get it. We will share the link to YouTube. We'll put this on YouTube if you want to share it with others. Please encourage anybody who is touched, who is neurodiverse, to buy the book. And in the spirit of Martin Luther King, we are all in this community together. And the more that we help each other, the better our world will be in this, and with love and the empathy. Our next event is going to be for just the committee, and that's going to be at Little Friend Center for Autism, co-hosted. Dan, I'm looking to you.
Yes, April 17th, Little Friend Center of Autism and Ray Graham will be hosting a dinner discussion about how Dr. King's beloved community includes neurodiversity. And the event is at Dan Casey Activity Center at Little Friends Adult Services Facility, located on Deal Road, from 5:30 to 7:30. And you should have got an invitation to attend. And that's terrific.
Thank you so much. Dr. Dunne, can't wait for your second book, which I know is going to be in the works. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.